For the next hour, you'll be leaving the Show Me state and entering the Show Me the Money state. So stop what you're doing, grab a pen, and get ready to learn. Jake Floyd of Floyd Financial Group will be your guide for straight talk and honest answers about living the life you deserve in retirement. So prepare to be empowered. Now, here are your Show Me the Money hosts, Jake Floyd and Jeff Shade.
Good morning. Thank you so much. Welcome to Show Me the Money, the radio show that gives you the straight talk and honest answers you need to help you reach your wealth management and retirement goals through smart investing and careful planning. My name is Jeff Shade, and as always, I'm just here to ask the questions. But you know the words of wisdom and solid advice. They come from Randy and Jake Floyd of Floyd Financial Group. Randy is off this week, so Jake, it's just you and me. How you doing this fine Saturday morning, my friend?
You know, I just hope I'm enough without Randy here.
You're more than enough. You are the spice to the steak when we do the show. I always enjoy your comments there. You have a different perspective on things. I mean, I think really that philosophically, both of you are on the same track, but you just have maybe a little bit different view from a younger standpoint. You really understand things like Bitcoin and so forth, right?
Right, yeah. And when it comes to that type of asset class, I think a lot of people expect young people to understand Bitcoin, which I do. But honestly, I'm a little bit of an old soul when it comes to retirement planning, investing, that kind of thing, because, I'm constantly dealing with people nearing and in retirement's money. And so I invest more like a 60 or 65-year-old than I do a 39-year-old.
Well, you've learned from the best. I mean, you didn't just join the firm a couple of years ago, did you?
Coming up on 18 years.
18 years. I'm glad that you have that philosophy. If you've got two people in the house, and I know you're there most of the time, Randy is not there as much as he used to be, but it's good that you're on the same page, that you have the same philosophies, the same ideas, and that you really listen to what the client needs. I mean, you can suggest things, but if I'm correct, the client always has the final say.
Absolutely. And the client is number one here. Well, all we want to do is put our clients in the very best possible position. We want to make sure that everything that we do brings value to the people that are here under our protection, if you will. And I think as long as that's the number one goal, everything else will fall into place. Yeah,
well, we didn't mean to start off the show with this particular conversation, but it just came out of nowhere. And I'm glad we talked about it, too, because I'm sure that some people who have been, longtime clients, or they have been new clients, they come in and they go, well, where's Randy? I understood it was a two-person operation. But, you're just doing the same thing that Randy would do if he were there. But I know that many times you sit in on meetings with Randy, so all is good. You get two for the price of one at Floyd Financial Group. Okay, Jake, it is the last Saturday of July. Time is flying here. We're having a lot of fun. So much to talk about on today's show. Where do we start? Well, let's start with the big one, and that's going to be Kamala Harris. I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, so we learned last week that she was going to supplant or take over for Biden, or however you want to look at it. And instantly people started falling in line. You had Bill and Hillary Clinton initially endorse her. We had George Soros fall in line, and Alex Soros' son, which, if you're a follower of politics, you know that these evil beings largely control the left wing of society here.
Right.
And you have everybody just kind of falling in line. Even in Joe Biden's supposed resignation letter from running in the race, he even endorses Kamala. So all of a sudden, over the next 48 hours, she raises $250 million worth of campaign funds, or pledges at least, which is pretty well unprecedented. The question really is, do they have enough time to rally the troops? And
right.
Is Kamala actually better for them or for anybody than Joe Biden? And I'm not sure the answer is yes, even though she's not a dementia patient.
Right. Well, they don't have a lot of time, as you said, and this was probably the best that they could throw out there for the time being, but we'll see what we see. Obvious omission in terms of endorsements was President Obama. I didn't hear him say anything at all.
Yeah, so he put out a little blurb, I guess, if you will, maybe like 7 or 8 paragraphs, but noticeably absent from that initial paragraph is an endorsement of Kamala Harris, which everybody else said, hey, bye Joe, hello Kamala, but he did not do that. There's a lot of people, I think, listening to this show that, if you listen to a lot of politics and things, it begs the question, who was running the country for the last 3 or 4 years, right? And so there's a lot of people that would say it was President Obama from the shadows. There's even a video of him, I think it was on 60 Minutes, and they asked him before he got out, I think this was late 2015, don't quote me on that. One of the questions they said is that, hey, if you could go for a third term, would you? And he said, if I could just sit at home in my basement and make the decisions from there, and if I had somebody's ear and I could just tell them what to do, I would do it. But short of that, I wouldn't do it. Kind of sounds a lot like what ended up happening, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's an interesting comment there. It sort of sounds like a puppeteer. And who knows, that may have been happening. I don't know if that was the way it was from the beginning, but certainly here as of late, I really highly suspect that somebody else was pulling the strings. Joe Biden has been conspicuously absent here. We haven't seen him a lot in public lately, but nevertheless, it is what it is. We're talking with Jake Floyd here, Floyd Financial Group, and we're talking about current events. We've, of course, talked about Kamala Harris. Let us pivot to the Fed's decision to cut interest rates. I understand that they'll have a meeting in September. That is the last one before the presidential election. Is it a foregone conclusion at this point, do you think, that we'll have interest rate cuts come September and more than one?
So we're going to have a decision whether to cut or not on the 31st of July as well, which is just Wednesday, just about 4 days from now. And I think at that meeting, it's very likely that they will not move rates. In fact, the Fed Watch decision tracker here, which is where everybody can go in and kind of aggregate what they think is going to happen, the pundits and the economists and everything, they have it pegged at about a 3% chance of him raising interest rates, lowering interest rates at this meeting 4 days from now. However, in September, there's over a 90% chance of a cut. And then at the subsequent two meetings, there's about 50% chance of more cuts. If you do the probabilities, there's about a 30% chance of 3 cuts by the end of the year, about a 50% chance of 2 cuts, and the chances of cutting in September are like 90+%. So far, the Fed, during this entire saga of rate policy over the last 2 years, they have done exactly what was predicted on the day of these meetings by this calculator. So if that's to say anything, that means they won't cut now. They'll cut in September, they'll cut in November, and then they might potentially cut in December, but we'll just have to see how that unfolds.
What is that going to mean to the investor, to the public, to the listener here? What will be the net result of only a 0.25% cut? And then let's talk about a 0.5% cut later on in the year.
The first cut is going to signal a change in direction. What will happen is I think the market has already priced in a lot of that good news, so I don't think the market will just kind of run screaming up. But I do think that we will see interest rates really pivot in a way that we haven't seen yet. And so once they start cutting, all the banks, all the different assets out there will try to kind of get ahead of what the Fed is doing. And so I think we'll see interest rates come down by more than 0.25%, even though they're only going to lower by 0.25% in anticipation. I think it's also likely that when you go to the bank to renew your CD after September, I think you're going to find that we're going to go from 5 to like 3 or something, because these banks are not going to want to get stuck holding the bag here.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, Jake, we're forecasting a 0.25% rate cut in September. By the end of the year, it should be, what, 0.5%, maybe 0.75%? What do you think?
Yeah, I'd say it's one or the other of those. I don't know that it really matters that much which it is by the end of the year. It's really more that we change direction and keep going. Now, one thing that we haven't talked about here is who is president during a rate cutting cycle is going to matter a lot here, because if we do not have some deflationary pressure while we're cutting interest rates, we're just going to go back to high inflation. So if we end up with Kamala or whoever at this point, I would be not quite as excited about cutting rates as I would be if we end up with Trump. So if we end up with Trump, he will go in there and he will drill for oil. He will bring the price of oil down to $30 or $40 a barrel, most likely, as he drills for it. That will create actual deflation, in my opinion, in this country. And so what will happen is, as oil falls, oil is either directly involved in the making of every product or it's involved in the shipping of every product. And so if the cost of that goes down by 50, 60%, you're going to have actual prices come down in this country in a lot of areas. And when that happens, that will give us the signal that we need to be able to lower interest rates back down to a reasonable level without reigniting inflation. The runway is there for a really good 1 to 3 year period here over the next little bit, maybe even as long as 5 years. where there's several things that could go right that could really ignite asset prices, ignite the stock market, ignite the housing market, get some inventory back in the housing market, because I think as soon as rates come down to, let's say, 5% for a 30-year mortgage, I think it will be off to the races in the housing market because people want to move. They just can't because interest rates are too high.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I have noticed this housing market has been sort of stuck here for quite some time, so that'll be some good news. I've saved one for last here, which affected me personally. I was pretty hot this past weekend here about CrowdStrike and this, I don't know exactly what happened, but my Windows wouldn't load and my PC, it really was a big, big mess. So can you explain that a little bit and how it has affected CrowdStrike as a company?
Yeah, so for those that don't know, CrowdStrike is a cybersecurity company first and foremost, which has been a company that's been very good. I still think they're a good company, but they had made kind of a rookie mistake. They uploaded an update to their software without testing it all the way through, and there was a logic error that went through. And what happened is it turned a bunch of computers into what's known in the industry as a brick.
Brick, yeah.
It just made the computer totally useless. Everybody got what's known as the blue screen of death. Not
Yes.
everybody, but a lot of computers did. So you turn on the computer and it won't turn on, basically. And so that happened in a lot of industries, but it affected Microsoft users the most. And it was responsible for about half of Wall Street not being able to place trades, to hundreds and hundreds of canceled flights at certain airlines. And so while I do like CrowdStrike as a company, I think that most of corporate America is going to try to sue them over the next 6 to 8 months here. So we're going to let that happen, and then we might go in and buy some. But it's going to be interesting. But it's kind of becoming known as the largest outage of this kind in history.
Yeah, and I was just so affected by that. I lost about 3 days of work. Couldn't get anybody to help me with that. I understand that TV stations, for example, in Seattle, several of the big TV stations went black. As you said, it really affected the airline industry. This was a terrible thing. Anyway, and I tried to do what CrowdStrike said to do to fix it. I had to call in an IT person. Anyway, I think that what I have learned from this, I left my computer on. I usually leave that computer on all night long. I never turn it off. But now I'm turning it off every single night to prevent something like this from happening again. We're talking with Jake Floyd, Floyd Financial Group. We've been talking about current events. I'm sure that you may have some questions about how these things will affect you and your finances, and you're looking for some sincere and actionable ideas to get you to retirement. We're offering that right now at Floyd Financial Group by offering you the opportunity to call 417-889-7233 this weekend and request your Floyd Financial Group retirement review. It's not going to cost you a dime whatsoever. There is no obligation. 417-889-7233 is our number. Make that call this weekend, and Ashley will call you back during the week and set up an appointment for you to come in and sit down with Jake and or Randy there at Floyd Financial Group and talk about your retirement journey. No questions off limits, and again, it doesn't cost you a dime. There is absolutely no obligation. Consider this. You've got a friend in the financial services industry who really does have your best interests at heart. So take advantage this weekend, 417-889-7233. You can also find out more about us online at FloydFinancialGroup.com. Time for a break, Jake. We'll be right back with more of Show Me the Money right here on 104.1 FM KSGF, where Springfield comes to talk.
Ready to climb a mountain of financial know-how? Good, because it's time for more Show Me the Money with your financial Sherpa, Jake Floyd.
Welcome back to Show Me the Money. I'm Jake Floyd. In this segment, we're going to be talking about how to avoid a mistake when rolling over your 401k that could cost you as much as $130,000 in this example.
That's right, Jake. Some 28% of savers who rolled over their retirement funds into an IRA, according to a recent survey, did not reinvest the money. They left it to sit as cash in a new account for at least 7 years. Now, I find that incredible, Jake, to go from an investment opportunity to a 401k to move it into an IRA, individual retirement account, and leave it in cash. Why do you think people do something like that appears to be just a simple mistake?
Yeah, I think a lot of this is people's just lack of understanding of how things work, and that's not their fault. As a society and as a country, a lot of the financial experts out there have gone out of their way to keep everybody in the dark so that they can justify their existence, to not put too fine a point on it. And so they don't want to teach anybody anything because they're worried that will put them out of a job and everybody will go do it themselves. And so when somebody leaves an employer and they roll out their 401k somewhere, they don't even know sometimes that it won't be invested automatically, because when you're in the 401k plan, you go in, you sign up, and that puts you into an allocation, and then you don't have to mess with it. So I have seen this several times before. Also, sometimes what will happen is we'll have people that are just crippled by indecision. They don't know what to do, and so they leave it in a stable value fund or something when, interest rates are near zero, so they're making 0.5%, and the market's ripping, and they're not participating. And again, that is not their fault. I'm not picking on anybody here. I'm just simply saying that's why it's so important to have somebody that you can talk to and you can ask questions or hire to manage that money for you.
And I'm reading here, this actually was a Vanguard study, Jake, that estimated that the mistake cost retirement savers a collective $172 billion a year in retirement wealth per person. That equates to more than $130,000 of foregone wealth by the time the person reaches retirement age. I'm thinking that the $130,000 is the lost growth or interest that you would make by not reinvesting it. What do you think?
Yeah, based on the average 401k balance of somebody close to retirement. And so I think that's a lot of money. I think it has cost people a lot more than that in some cases. I mean, I have people that were in the market in 2008, for example, and they were like, hey, I've lost half my money. I want out. And so they sold out, and they never got back in. And meanwhile, the market's up, 6, 7, 800% later, depending on where you got in. And, you haven't participated because, you just didn't understand what was happening and didn't understand enough to get back in at some point. All that is emotional on that side of the equation. As an advisor, probably my number one thing that I try to help people with is to either manage their emotions or take the emotion completely out of it by investing the money for them so that they can just do what they do, either whether they're working or whether they're retired, what they want to do, and not have to focus on investing the money 100% of the time. Because if you're going to do a good job managing assets and really controlling and mitigating risk, it's a full-time job and then some.
So what you're saying is that if you have money on a 401k, a lot of these choices are made automatically for you. You, of course, pick the funds, but the funds do what they do. Then when you go to an IRA, there's nobody there to do that automatic. You've got to actually do something. Otherwise, the de facto is going to be simply cash. Okay, so we've got our money in the IRA. We don't know what to do with it. We've said that emotion plays a big part in this. Of course, if you let Floyd Financial Group help you with that, we can take the emotion out of it. But do you have more choices with an IRA than you would with a 401k?
Absolutely, Jeff. And with the exception of maybe Fidelity, where they have a pretty liberal do-it-yourself platform, pretty much everywhere else it's fairly difficult, if not impossible, to have the entire investment universe at your disposal. Once you roll the money out of the 401k plan, which you can only do if you're 59 and a half in most plans or if you have terminated your employment. But if you have left that job or you have retired or you're over 59 and a half, there's a good chance you can roll money out of there. By rolling the money out of that plan, you gain kind of the entire investment universe of options to invest in. That's not always the right decision, though, because you also lose the ability to take advantage loans against a 401k, 403b, 457, that you have special loan provisions in there that are good. When you're trying to understand exactly what to do here, it really helps just to talk to somebody who's done it literally hundreds, if not thousands of times before. Even though it's maybe your first time, you can lean on the experience of somebody else. In my case, I've been here, like I said earlier, nearly 18 years. So I've seen and done a lot, and it's pretty rare that I get stumped in somebody's situation.
Jake, is it always a good idea to roll money out of a 401k into an IRA? Could you leave it into a 401k and possibly do better? Why would someone want to do that?
I definitely would not broadly say that you must roll out of your 401k plan. I will say there's a lot of advantages to rolling it out into an IRA. There are a few disadvantages, but it's really something that you're going to want to talk over with an advisor because there's just too many potential eventualities, to try to cover here on this radio show, unfortunately.
Well, I think most people listening to this program realize that I think with Floyd Financial Group that you're going to be able to make some pretty good decisions. You're going to be able to help them with these decisions. But let's say that they have rolled their money out of a 401k into an IRA. Now they have decisions to make if they're going to reinvest this money. What factors do you think that they should consider in picking their investment choices?
So number one would be your time horizon, meaning are you 30 now? Are you 60 now? When do you plan to retire? How much do you plan on this money to carry you through retirement? What is the purpose of this money? What's important to you? What do you do in your free time? These are all things that really play into that decision. And I think understanding when you're going to need the money and making sure that you're not at the mercy of what the market happens to be doing in that moment. All these factors, risk tolerance, right? How comfortable are you with large swings in the market? And again, as an advisor, that's more or less what I do here is we sit down, we talk about it, I get to know you, we get to understand what's important to you. From there, we can build the framework around a plan that'll help get you on the path to get you where you want to be. But when it comes to rolling money out, if you've already rolled money out, you can look at investing the money where it is. You could roll it again, depending on what you want to do. And so you have not most likely done anything that you can't fix at this point. So I don't want people to be sitting here thinking, oh, have I done the wrong thing? No, you haven't. And what you need to do is just really understand what all your options are and what might make sense for you specifically in your individual situation.
Jake, I'm thinking to myself, okay, I've got a job to do. I need to do that. I need to do it well. But then there's this 401k thing rolling into the IRA. Now I have to become an investment advisor, make these choices that could have some very serious consequences. I don't think the average person is really up to that task because they don't have the information and the knowledge that you do. Why do some people want to manage their own finances? Do they think that they're going to save money? Are they going to do it better than somebody who's been doing it for 30 years? Why would anyone want to do that?
I think about it like when your car has a problem, for the most part, people take it to a mechanic to have it fixed.
Right.
Not only because they do not possess the tools most likely to be able to fix it, especially if it's a later car, because you got to have computers and everything just to get under the hood. But also, even if you had all the tools you need, you probably still don't know what to do with them. Now, there's a few people probably listening to this show that could totally take their car apart and fix it and all that, and that's great. But the same is true for finance, where if my car breaks, I take it to the mechanic.
Sure.
And if you need help with financial advice, rather than taking the time to go ground up and become an investment expert, you might want to consider just hiring somebody to help you with that so that you can do what you do best. And or if you're going to be retired, so that you can enjoy retirement, not have to have another full-time job trying to manage the stock market or other investment strategies.
Well, to make that analogy, I've got two cars in the garage right now. One is a 2022 Subaru, but the other is a 1972 Mercury Cougar XR7 convertible. Now, I could dive into the Cougar a little bit because it's a very simple car. I would no way, shape, or form attempt to do anything to that Subaru. Is it the same with investment planning, that this is not your father's retirement planning? This is not your grandfather's retirement planning. It's a lot more complicated today than it was in 1972.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Jeff. And I think that people that were invested from 1980 to 1999 tend to over-romanticize the stock market in a lot of ways because they were the beneficiary of such a humongous growth period where some people invested $50,000 and they have a couple $1,000,000 now. I wouldn't say that's not possible, but I would say that it's very unlikely that we will see that type of growth again. And so there's a lot of people that kind of have this mentality, well, you just throw it in there in a mutual fund and it doubles and triples and quadruples and 10Xs. And if your time horizon's long enough, that can happen. And I'm not saying we can't make great returns. I'm just saying that, to your point, it's not nearly as simple as it used to be, where you can just kind of throw money in the Magellan fund or whatever the hot ticket is that moment and just sail off into the sunset, because that will come back to bite you most likely if you do not keep an eye on it.
Well, there are people that I affectionately call fee weenies, and they're worried about the fees. Oh, I'm going to pay so many fees to have somebody else do that. But I think the Dalbar study, D-A-L-B-A-R, look it up if you haven't heard of that. The Dalbar study says that if you let a financial advisor, an experienced financial advisor such as Floyd Financial Group, handle these things for you, that even after the very, very, very small fee, the commission, that you're going to make more money. Do you find that to be true, or what do you think about that study?
I would say that's definitely true for the average person. The only exception to that would be somebody that has an exceptionally high risk tolerance that's comfortable watching their money go down 60 and 70% in a down market. You can be invested aggressively enough at a low enough cost where you could outperform most people's money management, if you will. But for the most part, people getting ready to go in retirement, if they have $1,000,000, they're not ready to watch it go to 300,000 or something like that during normal course of market fluctuation. A lot of people don't know this, but like great stocks like Amazon, for example, was down nearly 60% in 2022. Now, there's nothing wrong with Amazon. That's just fluctuation of price, right? Even in COVID, Apple, which is the largest company on the planet at the moment, it went down 40% in COVID for no reason. COVID helped Apple.
Yeah.
There can be fluctuation, and knowing whether to stay in, buy more, jump out, whatever it is, based on the strategy, based on timing, based on people's time horizon, based on people's risk tolerance, is a little bit of an art form that gets developed over time. I think that if you have somebody that's only been managing money 1 or 2 years, they probably just haven't made enough mistakes to really understand what they're doing, and you don't want somebody practicing on you. If you're going to go have open heart surgery, you don't want the guy where it's his first time. You want the guy who's done 2,000 of these, right?
Yeah.
And why? Why is that important? Because people make mistakes.
Yeah.
The difference is the guy that's done 2,000, he made his mistakes, 20 years ago. And so he's not practicing on you.
Yeah, and I think that's a very valid point. Experience, there's a lot to be said for that, and also just the in-depth information that you have at your fingertips, too, to help you make these good financial decisions. Very, very important, and that is worth way more than the extremely small fee that you people get for managing someone's money. So that's a very common occurrence to have a 401k. Moving into an IRA, then the onus is on you to make those investment decisions. It's so important, my retirement. I wouldn't want to make those on my own. So if that is you, if you are a person who has rolled over a 401k into an IRA, you don't know what to do, well, you can call us here at Floyd Financial Group, sit down with Randy and Jake and ask those questions. They can do it for you if you'd like. If you've got any other questions about your retirement journey, we would love to sit down, have a little powwow with you. No cost, no obligation. It is a no-tie zone. It's just a casual conversation between friends. If you'd like to do that, 417-889-7233 is our telephone number. Make that call this weekend. Someone will be there to call you back during the week next week. All you've got to do right now this weekend is leave your name and telephone number. Get the conversation started. That is the most important part. 417-889-7233. You can also find out more about the firm and request your appointment online at FloydFinancialGroup.com. Jake, time for another break. We'll be right back with more of Show Me the Money on 104.1 FM KSGF, where Springfield comes to talk.
We're back with your financial catch of the day, and it's a big one. Here's more Show Me the Money Radio with your hosts, Jake Floyd and Jeff Shea.
Welcome back to Show Me the Money. I'm Jake Floyd, and in this segment, we're going to be talking about 7 big retirement risks to avoid.
And Jake, this is rather interesting that longevity is actually a risk to avoid. Now, I want to live as long as I can, but I think most people underestimate how long they're going to live. Well, run this plan out to 78 years of age. My grandfather lived to 78. I'm not going to live past 78. But, your grandfather and your father didn't have the medical advances and, the services and tools that are available to you today. They didn't have the knowledge that we do today. So longevity risk is a big one. When you do these retirement plans, Jake, how long do you run them out for? How long do you expect people to live?
As I'm running my plans and all of my scenarios and stuff, I like to see a 99% chance of success at 95 years old. Now, nothing is 100%, right? So I don't ever want to say, hey, there's a 100% chance of this, right? Because there's always a 0.1% chance of a nuke going off or something crazy. But 99% is a very seriously high number. I want to make sure that nobody runs out of money unless they choose to, meaning if they are purposely spending more money than I would advise them to, which does happen occasionally, right? I have some people, they say, hey, my kids never did anything for me, so I'm going to spend it all. And then I have people that shop at Goodwill so they can leave their kid $1 million, and everything in between. So that's why it's so important when we're talking that I understand what's important to you. Because what I think really doesn't matter from what we want to have happen to your money standpoint, right? It only matters what you want, and it's my job to help you achieve that.
Right, and I think that is the biggest risk to people's retirement savings is living too long. Can you live too long? I don't know that you can live too long. The average life expectancy was 68 years in 1950. Today, it is more like 78 years. So, take a look at the obituary columns. I don't read them regularly, but occasionally I do just to see how long people are going to live. There are a lot of ways that you can avoid dying. I'm not going to get into them right now, but I'll just say, wear your seatbelt and don't hang out in the bad parts of Springfield at 4 in the morning. That'll increase your chances tremendously. Okay, so these are retirement risks that we're talking about here. We've got 7 of them. The first one is longevity risk. The next one is going to be inflation risk.
Yeah, so inflation is something that has been a very hot topic for the last 4 years or so. But prior to the last 4 years, we had a very long period of an average inflation rate around 2%. So while I am concerned about inflation, there is only so much you can do to fend off inflation. Somebody was asking me a couple of years ago, they said, well, how do I make sure that I'm ready to handle 9% inflation? And I said, you don't, because 9% inflation is unsustainable. And there's no way that you can save enough money into retirement to be able to have 9% more income compounded for the next 30 years. You'd need $1 million today. You'd have to have $10 million 20 years from now. And so there's no way to fend that off. But I don't think we have to. It's important to build in an inflation fighting provision, if you will, into your retirement plan, meaning we need to not be spending the maximum possible amount from day one so that we have some room as the account grows to turn on more income looking forward. But I don't think we need to be worried about 6, 7, 8, 9% inflation. But we do need to make sure that we have more money 30 years from now to live on than we do today, because it will cost more to live.
Right, so don't stash that money in the mattress or something like that. You've got to account for inflation. Right now, inflation is between 2 and 3%, but as high as 8 and 9%. There's no guarantee that it won't go back up to that. I don't think that it is really in the foreseeable future. So again, you're counting on probably much lower inflation rates, but there are ways that you can combat inflation. And up until recently, until these rate cuts weren't imminent, that even with things like CDs and money markets that in some places we're paying 5%, would be better than inflation. So inflation risk, longevity risk, 7 of the things that we need to worry about here that are risks to your retirement. Next one is going to be tax rate risk. Taxes going up. Is it a foregone conclusion that taxes are going to increase?
Jeff, I think it's probably the opposite. Trump, if he gets his way, and if we get a little bit of help from the Senate and the House, would like to cut taxes even further for the individual and cut taxes for corporations as well. Whether or not that is the right decision, I'll leave up to the people listening. I will just say that I think it's probably a higher chance of cutting taxes from here than it is of raising them in the immediate future. However, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, it's anybody's guess what tax rates are going to be. And if you look at tax rates in the grand scale of things, meaning what's the highest they've ever been, what's the lowest they've ever been, we're very close to the lowest that they've ever been. Tax rates have been much, much higher in the past. I think it's probably safe to say that taxes will increase somewhat at some point. Making sure that you understand the tax implications of taking your money out now, later, how much you're paying in taxes while you're saving your money versus how much you're likely to pay in taxes when you're taking it out later could influence whether you use traditional 401k, Roth 401k, or even maybe it's just some non-qualified money to have laying around so that you don't have to wait till you're 59 and a half to get it. There's a lot of things to think about when you're saving money. A lot of people choose to just go the traditional 401k route, which arguably 70-80% of the time is probably the right decision, because when you're working, you're in a higher tax bracket than you are when you're retired, by and large. Now, not everybody fits that mold. A teacher, for example, is very common for them to make more in retirement than they did when they were working. There's no blanket solution here, and I want to make sure nobody's taking anything I say as advice over the radio, because that's definitely not what I'm doing here. But as a rule, most people choose traditional 401k funding because it saves them taxes now. And again, I would agree with that situation most of the time, but there are situations where more planning should be taken into consideration to make sure that you're understanding what your tax implication could be later in your life, or even when you're passing it to your kids.
So your opinion is that for the next 4 years, if Trump gets into office, that we may not see tremendous tax increases, if at all. We may see some tax reductions. I would love to see the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act come back. But after 4 years, it's almost anyone's game as to what's going to happen with taxes. So you need to plan for retirement. It's going to be more than 4 years. I mean, think about this. If you're 65 right now, you live to be 95, which is possible, very, very possible these days. You've got a 30-year retirement, so we got to account for taxes. Next one is going to be healthcare costs risk. And, you know, when I take my wife to the doctor, I go to the doctor, more than half of those people are elderly people. And I think that at one time or another, healthcare is going to be a big expense for us.
Yeah, and studies have shown that about 90% of all of the money you'll spend on healthcare, you spend after you're 65. It is an important thing to think about, especially if you're going to retire prior to 65. You got to figure out what you're going to do for health insurance because you don't have Medicare to fall back on. So number 4, healthcare cost risk, and number 5, long-term care cost risk are kind of the same thing, right? Because a lot of that goes hand in hand. It's important to have a plan for how you're going to tackle paying for healthcare costs. Even not having a plan is still a plan. You're just going to pay for it out of pocket. But it would be good to think about what asset you're going to set aside to pay for that care cost, or at least what you would liquidate first to pay for that. And depending on how painful that is for you, there are some things that you can do. There's some asset-based long-term care policies that could make sense that help leverage your money. It's not your traditional pay monthly thing, but you could set aside a certain amount of money earmarked for long-term care costs where you can leverage your money 2 to 1, maybe even 3 to 1. And that's something we can talk about if that's important to you during your consultation.
And many times in this show, your dad has said, flip a coin, 50% you're going to go in the nursing home, and 50% I'm going to go into the nursing home. I think it is probably more than likely at some point in time in your life, if you live very long, that you'll go into a nursing home. And we've also talked about the 4 ways to pay, and I think long-term care insurance policies is number 4 on that list. So if you're listening to the program right now, you're worried about long-term care, call us here at Floyd Financial Group, 417-889-7233. We'll get that worked out for you. Next one is going to be lifetime income risk.
Yeah, so a lot of people, they have too much of their money coming from Social Security. As we're looking at how to use your other assets to generate more income, there's a lot of factors that come into play. We're also probably facing the first cut to Social Security that we've ever seen in the next few years here, because the fund is going to go broke if they don't. Now, how they cut, when they cut, who they cut, those are all details that have not been worked out yet. But as they're talking about cutting Social Security, we need to be seriously thinking about where we're going to make up the difference in our income and how we're going to do that in a way that's sustainable. If you're one of the people that is blessed to have a nice pension, there's very few people left that have pensions. I want to say it's like 11% is the last statistic that I saw. But if you are in that camp, then that helps you really fend off the lifetime income situation. But for everybody else, we have to make sure that what you've saved lasts the rest of your life. And that's what we talked about in the first point on this, is just making sure that the money lasts as long as you do.
7 big retirement risks to consider when going into retirement, and risks that you want to avoid. Jake, number 7 on the list, the last one here, is stock market risk. The stock market can be a risky place. Some people say it's sort of like gambling, but I don't think there's a comparison to gambling in the stock market. What do you think?
Yeah, so anything where you have an edge is not as much gambling as like going to the casino, right? So the casino, you have, a chance of winning, chance of losing.
It's a game of chance.
Blackjack, for example. Your odds, if you play correctly, are very close to 50-50. In the stock market, there's a lot of things that you can use to your advantage as far as history and how the stock market behaves. And so while I would say that it is the world's largest casino, it's a casino where you can have an edge, and it's a casino that benefits from inflation and time passage. And because of that, it works in your favor in retirement. It is also the greatest wealth creation tool in the history of mankind, versus a casino is the greatest money-losing tool of all time. It's not a fair comparison to compare the two, but I will say that there is a certain element of luck to the stock market, but there's a lot more to it than that. And the more time you spend studying it, the more you realize that there are a lot of patterns that happen in the market. And if you have that information, you can use it to your advantage.
Right. And the stock market does have some element of risk that you can't control. And I think as retirees get older, their tolerance for market risk should decrease. And of course, there's sequence of return risk that we talked about too. So those are 7 retirement risks to avoid. We're talking here with Jake Floyd of Floyd Financial Group. If you'd like to get in and sit down with Jake, request your no cost, no obligation, no judgment retirement review. That number, 417-889-7233. 417-889-7233. No cost, no obligation. Make that call this weekend. 417-889-7233. Jake, we're going to take a break. The final part of our show is upcoming here when Show Me the Money continues right here on 104.1 FM KSGF, where Springfield comes to talk.
People of the Ozarks, step away from the fishing pole and prepare to be shown the money, because we're back with more straight talk and honest answers with Jake Floyd and Jeff Shea.
Welcome back to Show Me the Money. I'm Jake Floyd. In this last segment, we're going to be talking about some sensible retirement planning tips you can use to fight off FOMO, the fear of missing out.
Okay, well, that's what I was going to ask you. What is FOMO? We're not FOMOing at the mouth here. It's called fear of missing out. And a lot of people have that. They don't want to get, lost out there. All this is going on, and I've missed out. Nobody wants to be late to the party. So let's start off. We've got 3 tips here to talk about. What is the first one, Jake?
Yeah, so having realistic goals that align with what you're trying to accomplish is probably the biggest thing, is you need to understand where you want to go if you're ever going to get there, right? If I want to walk to Bolivar, Missouri, let's say from my office, and I start by heading south, that's not going to work out very well.
So set realistic goals. Some people are going to say, well, I need $1 million in retirement. That's going to be my goal. And that can be unrealistic if you're already 65 and you got $200,000. Do you find that people, you kind of have to reel them in once in a while, or they do have unrealistic expectations about how much money that they actually need to have a safe and secure retirement?
So I have people that are kind of all over the board on this one. I have people that are just sure they don't have enough money when they do. And then I have people that are sure they're going to be fine, and unless something changes, they're not going to be fine. On an individual basis, we talk about, again, what's important to them, what they're trying to accomplish, when they're trying to accomplish it. Sometimes I have people that want to front load their income. So they're saying, hey, I'm going to retire, and these next 10 years, I know I'm going to be healthier than the next 20 or 30 years. And so while I'm in this first 10 years, I want to spend more knowing I'll have to spend less later, but that's okay because I want to enjoy this next 10 years. And if that's you, then we can definitely do that. And so it's really about what's important to you. And there's lots of creative things we can do to kind of squeeze more blood out of the turnip, if you will. But it all comes down to really understanding where you want to go first. I need to understand it. You need to understand it. And then we can start formulating a plan.
So I think a lot of people, as you said, have unrealistic goals, but some people have no goals whatsoever. They're flying by the seat of their pants. When they come in and sit down with you and say, Jake, I don't know if I can retire. I don't know what my goal should be. How does that conversation go? How do we determine what their goal really should be and whether or not it's attainable?
Yeah, so for a lot of people, when they want to retire, they just don't want to go backwards a long ways, right? They say, hey, I want to retire. I'm used to living comfortably at this income level. I might be able to live on a little bit less, but I don't really want to go backwards. And so finding a budget is kind of one of the first things that is necessary to do. And a lot of people have never done a budget. One easy kind of hack, if you will, is to say, hey, let's look at how much money hits my account every month in income. Not how much I make salary-wise, but how much take-home pay you get each month. Then we add back in whatever the cost of healthcare will be based on your age. And that's a good baseline budget. Because in retirement, you'll have less taxes. You won't be paying Social Security tax. You won't be funding your 401k. You won't be paying FICA, all that. And so if we remove all that by taking your take-home pay and then adding back in insurance, it's a good baseline number to be able to have some idea of where you're at. So if we start there, then we can reverse engineer the plan to determine how much money you need, coupled with Social Security, coupled with any pensions that you may have, and then back our way into exactly what we need to have safe. Sometimes when we do that calculation, people are already way ahead of that. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they're very close. Sometimes they're a long ways off. But that's something that I can help you work out when I see you at your appointment.
3 tips to fight off FOMO, fear of missing out. That's our subject with Jake Floyd here, Floyd Financial Group. Next one, it's going to be emotions. And I think when it comes to money, people get emotionally all tied up in it, don't they?
Yeah, so money is maybe one of the most emotional things out there. And that seems kind of counterintuitive at the first part, but most divorces happen over money. What you spend your money on shows what's important to you. As you get retired and you realize that you don't have all the time that you once had, sometimes when the market goes on a hiatus, it can be extremely emotional and very difficult to make good decisions. So that's where an advisor can come in handy, where he can take the emotion out of it for you so that you don't have to sit there and make these decisions. And when you want to jump out, you have somebody to help keep you invested. Or maybe pull back the reins a little bit if you get too overly exuberant. Sometimes the market has irrational exuberance, meaning it's way ahead of itself. Usually, what you want to be doing is the opposite of what everybody else is doing, meaning if there's a bloodbath in the market, that's because everybody's selling. Usually in those situations, that's not when you want to sell. Conversely, if the market is up huge and everybody's saying it's going to keep going up forever, usually that's a good time to be cautious, because the only thing that can happen is for people to become less exuberant and therefore start selling and bringing markets down. Trying to take the emotion out of it and look at the situation for what it is very important. And it's very hard to do with your own money. And even managing your own money as an investment advisor can be difficult. There's a lot of investment advisors that hire other people to manage their money because it's too emotional for them.
To use the medical analogy, it's the reason why doctors don't operate on family members is because they can't take the emotion out of it. And it's the same way, I think, with financial advice. You really need to have somebody who is taking a practical approach, who has no emotional stake in it, to make the best decisions. So number 2 in our 3 tips to fight off FOMO is going to be avoiding emotions. The last one here is diversification. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so I had a meeting recently with one of my clients, and he's up a lot, but he was saying, I don't understand why we have these couple of stocks that are down. Why do we keep stocks if they're down? And the answer to that question is you can't just buy all tech stocks all the time. I guess you can, but it's generally not a great idea, especially for somebody that's in retirement. While that may or may not produce the highest rate of return, most people are not comfortable with the huge swings in their retirement portfolio that they might be comfortable with earlier when they're 30 or 40 or something like that, when they have time on their side. If we do not diversify the portfolio and buy lots of different kinds of stocks and maybe even different kinds of asset classes, annuities, gold, Bitcoin, life insurance, real estate, whatever it may be, it's good to have diversification, even though we don't want to be so diversified that we can't make any money, but it's good to have more than just a single basket for your eggs to go in. Now, having an advisor that can actually deal in all those things is actually kind of difficult to find. The reason why my door doesn't say, Edward Jones or Merrill Lynch or something on it is because those advisors are limited in what they can sell by the company that owns them. And so in my case, choosing to be independent allows me to offer anything and everything that my client would want or need, frankly, for me to fulfill my fiduciary obligation, which is putting your interest above mine. And so I don't think that you can reasonably do that if the only thing you can do is sell stocks, or if the only thing you can do is sell annuities, or whatever your one-trick pony thing is. You need to be able to do whatever is right for the client in that moment, including, selling CDs, for example, in a market where you can get 5%. 5% is nothing to scoff at. Now, I think the days of having 5% CDs are numbered, but in the right environment, you need to be able to access all the different investment classes if necessary.
And I don't want to necessarily slam, Merrill Lynch or Edward Jones too much here. They're what we call captive agents, and they may be very good at what they do. But as you said, they're what I call limited scope advisors, mostly stocks, bonds, annuities, some insurance products. That's pretty much all they can offer you. But a comprehensive financial advisor like Floyd Financial Group really has a very deep toolbox. There are a lot of solutions that we can pick from when it comes to your investment journey at Floyd Financial Group. So these are some of the tips for fear of missing out. They would be having realistic goals, emotions, and having diversification in your portfolio. Jake, if you could add anything else to this list, what would you add to that people want to avoid when it comes to fear of missing out?
I would say try to avoid the bandwagon effect. Try to avoid chasing what everybody else is chasing, because by the time it's there to be chased, it's usually over, or at least starting to get tired. There are exceptions to that, where you have overarching themes that last decades, such as artificial intelligence or something that will probably be around a long time. But usually, by the time people realized how big a deal Bitcoin was, right, all the easy money had been made. And so try not to just flock to whatever is working at the moment, because most of the time you're probably going to be too late.
Talking with Jake Floyd, Floyd Financial Group. We've been talking about fear of missing out and some tips here to fight off FOMO. Jake, we've been asking people to call 417-889-7233 during this show. They can do it this week and to sit down, have a conversation with you. In just a few moments that we have left here, what is that initial consultation going to be like? I mean, do they need to bring a checkbook? Do they need to bring tax returns, all of their financial records? I mean, how do we start this conversation with you?
Yeah, so you don't really need to bring anything with you if you don't want to. If you want to have the most productive conversation, if you can bring financial statements and that kind of thing, just in case we want to look at it, that might help make better use of your time. But you don't have to bring any of that stuff. What I really want to do is just have a conversation with people and see if we're a good fit for each other first. sometimes people come in and I don't think I can improve their situation much or at all. And I'll say that. I'll say, hey, here's a tip or two, do this or that, but I don't think you need me. Again, there's a lot of cases where I do think they need me, but there's some cases where I don't think that's the case, and I will tell you that. I want to be 100% transparent, 100% honest with everybody, and all I'm really looking to do is get to know you in that first meeting. There's zero pressure. If you want to have that one meeting and that's it, that's fine. If you want to set up a follow-up meeting to see what some recommendations might be, that's fine. But again, you're going to be 100% in control of that. And I'm not going to try to put the big thumb on you, as my dad would say.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're worried about being sold something, it's not going to happen here at Floyd Financial Group. As we've said many, many times, this is just a casual conversation. It's like talking to, a smart uncle who's been in the financial services business all these years. Sit down with Randy or Jake at Floyd Financial Group and ask the questions that you need the answers to put you on a path towards a confident and prosperous retirement. It's not going to cost you a dime, no obligation whatsoever, and certainly there's no judgment. Our telephone number, 417-889-7233. Make that call this weekend while you're thinking about it. Leave your name and telephone number. It'll take you just about 60 seconds to do that. Ashley will call you back during the week and set up that conversation. Once again, 417-889-7233. You can also vet us. Find out more about us at FloydFinancialGroup.com. It's FloydFinancialGroup.com. Jake, out of time for this week. Thank you so much for your time. I want to thank our fine listeners here in Springfield, Missouri for joining us as well, too. For Jake and Randy, I'm Jeff Shade. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you again next week with another edition of Show Me the Money right here on 104.1 FM KSGF, where Springfield comes to talk.
The information provided in the preceding program is for educational purposes only and are not intended as investment advice for any individual or entity. All information contained herein believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representations as to its completeness or accuracy. The opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and do not constitute financial, legal, or tax advice. Please consult your financial professional before executing any financial strategy. Financial planning offered through Floyd Financial Group, LLC, an investment advisor registered in the state of Missouri.